I am a 37-year-old. Dave is a talented car mechanic, now 36 years old, with an impressive wealth of experience in the industry. He is not only affectionate, but he also possesses all the qualities of a genuinely good person. Dave was a loving, compassionate and loyal man among other qualities, especially as a devoted husband. Unfortunately, Dave spent his childhood surrounded by an alcoholic father and a troubled man who often brought home poison gas. As a result, she had to endure all the hardships that Dave's behavior caused her. As a teenager, Dave bravely stood up for his mother and made a sincere plea to her to divorce his father. Soon, his determination and ability to learn quickly led to his promotion to machinist, while at the same time, his mother, who was already working 2 jobs, was freed from the burden of providing for her alcoholic husband and his addiction. My husband and father, Dave, defied conventional expectations in the most admirable way, and despite his lack of higher education, I was fascinated by his street smarts and innate resourcefulness. In the early stages of our relationship, Dave demonstrated his indomitable work ethic by tirelessly building our home. Despite the fact that we lived together before we were married, he continued to honor his family responsibilities by visiting his mother and checking on his brothers every day. Not only did he exemplify the outstanding qualities of a husband and father, but he helped shape the lives of those around him. In addition, Dave's mother was very kind and treated me like her own daughter, and every time she came to visit she brought delicious homemade biscuits that were still warm from the oven. Both parents were secondary school teachers, which provided my brother and I with an education and a sense of security, and even though we weren't rich, my parents made sure we had everything we needed for a decent life. I was happy to work for a local news channel. As a child, my parents instilled in me the importance of independence, especially financial independence. As a result, I never viewed Dave in terms of social relationships or felt that there were any differences between us. My parents always emphasized that we should achieve everything on our own, and that dictated our decisions. I used to go to the garage where he worked and Dave used to work on my car there. Over time, a friendship developed between us, which grew into a romantic relationship. At first Dave was disappointed as he was looking forward to becoming a father and possibly even considering ending our relationship, but eventually he accepted the idea of not having children, despite his desire to have cats. So, having entered into a marital union, we decided to get 2 charming cats. A few months ago I met someone in the office. I'll call him Tom. Tom is 27 years old and has just joined the company. He always keeps to himself because he has no acquaintances. He always kept to himself as he had no acquaintances, yet at lunchtime, and more often during breaks when we were all together, it was natural for him to feel out of place as a new face in the office, an out-of-the-way corner where new arrivals usually seek solace, but there was some inexplicable attraction to it. Perhaps it was the longing and nervousness that reflected in his eyes, although I couldn't be sure. He accepted my invitation without hesitation. I asked him about his loneliness in his new office, and he simply nodded, acknowledging that it wasn't limited to the workplace. I wanted to find him friends and make him feel like a more complete member of the company. I often invited him to join me over coffee, but it was a purely professional relationship. Interestingly, during his training, he was transferred to my team, which brought us closer together. We began to share lunches and sometimes even dinners during breaks. I always thought this was a bore's interest, so I never explored the subject in any depth, and that's when I started lying to Dave, who wanted us to have dinner at least once a day, but when Tom came along, it became much more difficult to coordinate everything. I started lying to Dave, claiming that I had a dinner date with a client because I couldn't say that I'd actually decided to stay at work and have dinner with a junior colleague. I felt guilty from time to time as I enjoyed Tom's company, but I justified my behavior by convincing myself that it wasn't treasonous because there was no physical contact. More importantly, he truly loved me. I must admit that I was pleased with the attention he paid to me, which prompted me to be more conscious of my appearance at work, boldly choosing tight red outfits to emphasize my figure. Dave and I have been married for 10 years, and before that I dated him for about 3 years. It was wonderful to have the experience of receiving such attention from the opposite sex for a long period of time. I really appreciated the compliments he gave me on everything I wore and accessorized. Then I fell in love with my colleague Tom, who turned out to be a big influencer on social networks with over 190. I found out that he is also on Twitch channel which gathers an average of over 20. I was both excited and intrigued because I've always been interested in media and social platforms, but I wasn't familiar with Twitch, which was interesting considering the amount of effort we put into connecting with people. I walked into his studio and was surprised to find a much more minimalist setup than what I was used to, and it smelled so much more pleasant. I couldn't resist and immediately started dreaming up my own show and asked him a number of questions about his streaming radio CS, but he chose not to answer some of them, insisting that I wait until the live broadcast. Tom went live and was more than happy to answer questions and share valuable exercise tips from training in the gym, and although he usually streams his matches live, today it was all different. It was an intense and interactive live broadcast that allowed viewers to actively engage with him, and I couldn't help but get a sense of Tom's charisma when I watched this side of him. The live stream lasted for an hour until he finally ended it. After ending the live stream, Tom asked me what I was thinking, and as we joked around in conversation, I gradually moved closer to his screen, wondering if it was really off. But this time he offered to drink it on the sofa, where he sat with his hands on my hips. I think I will be criticized by many for this comment, but I didn't feel any guilt. When we entered into intimacy, at first I thought it was an isolated case, however an electric sensation swept through my whole body forcing me to dissolve completely. It was an intense and unbridled experience, and it's important to realize that at home Dave hadn't shown any signs of insanity, so I realized that I did not feel any guilt after this meeting. I did not feel the slightest remorse after this meeting, not even the regret I had anticipated when I got home and saw Dave asleep. I felt remorseful as I looked at his pure form, but I tried to explain that my love for Dave outweighed any fleeting connection with Tom in spite of all the assurances I had made within myself. A couple of days later, when I plucked up the courage to ask Tom if we could see each other again, he asked me if I was going out for dinner or for a cup of coffee. I wasn't sure if he had picked up on my subtle hints or if he was just feigning indifference. I was kept in the dark and his uncomprehending reply confused me. I muttered the word coffee in a low voice, and when I returned to my workplace I felt confused. It wasn't until that moment that I realized that Tom's behavior had changed since that night. I hadn't known about it and I decided to go to his flat on Friday night to check it out, but in the end we didn't meet and we didn't exchange a word all weekend. I spent the whole day wondering if he wasn't interested in me, and in the end I decided not to ask him out, but to wait for him to initiate a date. I watched him bury his head in his work and give it his full attention, but by the end of the day he contacted me via WhatsApp on my work phone and apologized for his busy schedule and for not being able to meet me for coffee. In addition, my biggest concern was whether you would blackmail me or take any action that could jeopardize my marriage. The unknown gives me no peace of mind and I am tormented by a sense of guilt. I know what I have done is disgusting, so instead of pointing out my unreliability, my abominations, or my poor behavior, I am simply asking for your presence and support. I don't know how I survived this situation, let alone how I will live with it. He quickly replied that he wasn't ignoring me on purpose, but was busy working and looking for more comfort. I asked him if I hadn't lived up to his expectations that day, and he breathed a sigh of relief and said I had exceeded all his expectations. I just wanted to get to know him better, so I willingly agreed. He sensed my desperation and intensified it, in turn asking me to describe in detail, without hesitation, my desires and expectations for our next meeting. I agreed and carefully wrote down all the details before we met again. On that fateful day, Dave went to the car repair station and unbeknownst to me I decided to stay home. I quietly called in sick to work and Tom told our manager that he would be working remotely that day. Finally, in the afternoon, he arrived, which marked the beginning of Thursday. Somehow, a bad feeling told me that this meeting would be the last, so I cherished every moment together as much as I could, and despite Tom's insistence that I was leaving in 2 hours, I pleaded with him to stay a little longer, knowing deep down that leaving him would be a much riskier decision, that the sun had already set and that there was a chance that Dave might be coming home. But I was filled with thoughts of my special Tom and the likelihood of Dave coming back seemed remote to me. Tom left around 5 o'clock in the evening, and that's when I realized that, because Tom didn't like the cats, I had locked them in a cramped room. The cats continued to claw stubbornly at the door, desperately trying to get free as they couldn't get to the loo or food, 00:00HRS, and he was nowhere to be seen. I was worried and tried to contact him on the phone, but he didn't pick up. I tried to confirm our plans for dinner and sent him a text message anxiously inquiring as to the time he would be arriving, but my text message wasn't replied to, leaving me in a state of uncertainty. He seemed to be quite distant, and despite my attempts to create a cozy atmosphere, there was tension in the air, and I couldn't help but feel frustrated, suspecting that my attempts to cheer Dave up were futile. But I pushed those thoughts aside and willingly served him his favorite lasagna. My actions didn't surprise him. He just walked into the room without reacting, had a quick shower, changed his clothes, and went to bed. He suddenly got up from his seat and headed towards the dining room. I followed closely behind him as an uneasy silence enveloped us. I desperately tried to suppress my emotions, as the mere thought that my betrayal might be revealed made me even more anxious. Finally, Dave broke the silence as he opened his mouth and asked, "Is this the colleague?" Dave took a deep breath and continued, "I saw everything through the camera on the cat feeder, and before I had a chance to answer, he had already said something that left me speechless. I thought he'd accessed my phone while I was asleep, but he explained that a few days earlier he'd inadvertently logged onto my laptop where my WhatsApp work account was active, and from there he'd seen the messages and extracted them. The chat transcripts didn't mention the exact date on which Tom and I had planned to meet, a fortunate oversight that saved me from serious embarrassment. The mere thought of Dave catching me with Tom terrified me, and in frustration I couldn't help but accuse Dave out loud of invading my private life during the chat. We discussed future plans, but there was no evidence to support any of our previous experiences. Unfortunately, Dave seemed to be completely engrossed in his mobile phone and wasn't paying any attention to what I was saying, and in frustration, I impulsively picked up his phone and urged him to listen to me. I clung to his knee, sobbing uncontrollably, pleading with him to give me one last chance, but he remained adamant and said nothing about my pleas. He said calmly, and I realized that he was right, that his decision was firm, and that, for the moment at least, the house we were living in belonged to Dave as he had built it before the marriage, and that I had no rights to it. All I wanted was Dave, and when it was late at night I told him I would leave the house the next morning. It was after midnight by then. He agreed with me and said he was happy with it, but asked me to leave when he came home the next day. He was in a heavy mood and I took him by the hand and begged him to stay. I persuaded him that he could sleep in a separate room. He said he couldn't be under the same roof as me, shook off my hand and left, and as much as I wanted to leave the house immediately, I couldn't resist and stayed, hoping that Dave's mood would calm down the next day. Early the next morning, I purposely didn't go to the office and waited anxiously for Dave's return. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Dave finally returned home as usual, but his tired gaze met mine and I sighed in annoyance. In that moment I realized the hard truth that my husband was gone, so I quickly packed my things and left the house in a hurry, traveling aimlessly in my car, not knowing where to go next. When I walked into Tom's flat, I found him alone, and I immediately hugged him tightly, expressing concern at my sudden tardiness as he asked about my health. Tom invited me into the flat. He noticed I was shivering and kindly handed me a cozy blanket, which I gratefully accepted. 2 days of malnutrition had left me bone-chilling cold. Tom insisted on giving me a bowl of hearty soup, and I reluctantly sat and continued to cry as he patiently poured the soup for me with a spoon and then hugged me tightly, giving me comfort and warmth. I soon fell asleep, finding solace in Tom's warm and comforting embrace. When I woke up and saw that Tom was still asleep, I realized that I needed a shower. I went downstairs and carried all my suitcases to the flat, had a refreshing shower and got dressed. I couldn't help but tear up and complain. To lighten the mood I made toast and coffee for myself and Tom. When Tom woke up I hugged him tightly and thanked him for his continued support. As we sat down to breakfast Tom mentioned that he had an appointment with a friend and asked about the time of year that I was going to be leaving. I gently took his hand and summoned up the courage to ask him to start a relationship again. I sincerely invited him to move in with me, and when my words hung in the air he stared at me with eyes full of uncertainty and firmly stated that he didn't want a relationship with me. When I asked him how he sincerely confessed his love for me, he said he had done so before, that he kept confessing his love for me, and despite my skepticism about the age gap and his unwillingness to develop a relationship, he convinced me that he didn't care about age. But when I asked him a question, he first confirmed with a serious face that it was all just talk, explaining that men often say meaningless things to impress women. I reminded him that I had sacrificed my marriage to be with him, but he quickly put the blame on me, claiming that he had never asked me to end my relationship with Dave. I looked at him skeptically and decided not to give up. I heard a hint of deception in his voice, even though I wasn't familiar with Twitch and didn't know the specific identifier or username. Refusing to back down, as if to prove my point, I grabbed my phone and quickly downloaded the Twitch app, and as I signed up for a Twitch account, my heart began to pound and my jaw clenched in excitement at the anticipation. But all I got in response was a giggle as he absently paced around the kitchen and living room, going about his daily business. I made countless attempts to find their accounts, trawling through all possible variations of their names, but my attempts were futile, which made me even more desperate, and sensing my frustration, he finally advised me to stop my searches, claiming that the entire platform was fictitious, that it had 000 subscribers, and that his radio audience had never been more than 20, and that, knowing that I wasn't familiar with Twitch, he exploited my ignorance, managed to fool me so much that I caught him off guard and asked him how he did it. He admitted that he used a fake app to ingratiate himself to me. He claimed that he made a bet with a friend that he could win me over in the first week, but ingratiating himself to me proved to be a lot harder than he expected as he attempted to get my attention and manipulate me. As soon as I heard this, darkness seemed to envelop me, forcing me to cry uncontrollably, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. How could I have been so stupid when, unlike the previous guy, instead of offering me any comfort or reassurance, he suddenly forced me to pack up and leave. He unceremoniously threw my things out of the flat and I left silently like a ghost. I walked down the stairs clutching my bags tightly and found myself surrounded by a continuous downpour and intermittent snow flurries that were so cold and biting that they sent shivers down my spine. Upon arriving home, I saw my mother alone, as my father was away on a business trip. She was pleasantly surprised by my visit and I said that I wanted to keep her company considering she was alone. She understood this as my parents sometimes took a break and traveled alone or went on nature retreats with friends. During this difficult time, my strength dwindled, and while recuperating at my mother's house, I didn't receive any messages from Dave or his family asking when I was going to pick up what was left of the things in our shared house or how our cat was doing. When the phone rang for the third time, I abruptly cut it off. My mother was well aware that something was wrong and she insisted that I believe her, but I begged her to give me time and space. With tears in my eyes, I admitted to Dave that I had done something terrible, and I pleaded with her to be patient and tell her when I was ready. Finally, she gave in and hugged me, assuring me that she understood, but I promised to tell her before my father arrived. I was shocked by his unusual behavior towards me because he was the one who betrayed me. In retrospect, I understand that there were many ambiguous signs in his behavior, but I was foolish enough not to notice them. Instead, I became a victim of his deceptive behavior, which makes me wonder if I deserved what happened to me. In the week since I'd found refuge with my mother, I'd been trying to move forward and rebuild my life. And I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that Dave is going to divorce me. It's only a matter of time before I get my divorce papers. I still have a lot of things to figure out how to tell my parents, what to do to salvage our life with Dave, or maybe if I ask to see our cats I can see Dave. I feel like there's no one that can get me out of this. In my mind I've hit rock bottom. I hadn't realized that my boss wanted to see me in his office. I reluctantly walked in to see him holding a bag containing hard evidence of me cheating on Tom, along with a copy of the chat logs and a video taken by the camera on the cat feeder that Dave had said. My boss was well aware of the strict rules the company had on relationships between colleagues. At a difficult time, I stood before him in tears, desperately begging for a chance, but he told me that Tom had been sacked and didn't give me a chance to set the record straight. I pleaded with my supervisor to let me stay in my old position, but he told me that he had already defended himself to the company executives in order to keep my job, and that according to company policy I should have been fired along with Tom, but due to my experience and stability during my time with the company, I kept my job. News of my demotion quickly spread throughout the office, and to make matters worse, I was moved to a less visible desk in the back of the office. At the time, I was very tempted to quit. Besides, I didn't have a husband to fall back on, and I wasn't expecting alimony because Dave had made a good faith effort to do so. Maybe Dave would give me another chance, maybe May would give me another chance, maybe I would never leave him if I had a child to look after. Now I hadn't told my mom about this, and as soon as I got back to work she stopped asking me to explain. As soon as Mom entered the house she handed me the divorce papers she'd kept, and after I don't know how long I admit I wanted to confess, but I was gripped by fear, and a wave of anger hit me, and she raised her voice and insisted I should tell her about it within 2 months. But Dave began to show her irrefutable evidence, and in that moment I concluded that even if Mom hadn't asked, he would have willingly shared the evidence because it was clear that his intention was to destroy me. A few days later, my father returned from a business trip and my mother told him all the details. Despite Dave's courteous treatment of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brought shame on my parents by putting them in this situation. I desperately pleaded with my father to step in and convince Dave to give up the idea of divorce. At that point, my father looked up and sternly told me that divorce was inevitable. It finally dawned on me that this chapter in my life was over, and the longer I put off the divorce, the more damage it would do to me. The news of my divorce spread and their version of events began to coincide, and although there was an element of truth in their gossip, being at the center of such immoral conversations in the office was unpleasant for me, especially for those I had once considered my friends. As a result of this unhealthy lifestyle, I gained 12 kilograms in just 2 weeks, and thankfully my mother intervened and sent me for treatment as I had completely lost interest in life and my only wish was to have Dave back in my life as I felt I desperately needed him. But Dave flatly refused my request, even though I had agreed to all his conditions. He said he couldn't stand to be cheated on, he was reminded of his great desire to be a father, and that he had sacrificed his own dreams to be with me, and Mom came back disappointed, saying that I'd stupidly lost a wonderful man for nothing, and that I hadn't even left a pebble in the ground. Escaping my childhood home was necessary because I couldn't even look my father in the eye and see the shame in his eyes when he looked at me. Rumors of my infidelity and subsequent divorce quickly spread throughout the area, and I was met with a cold shoulder everywhere I went, and awkward stares in public. As a result, I've decided to move to the Bay Area. I'm boarding a plane tomorrow morning, hoping to forget the past and start my life anew. Because of one mistake, I lost my hometown, my successful career, my friends, my beloved pets, and even my family. Sometimes I wonder if that mistake really led to such dire consequences. Throughout my student years and the early part of my career, my parents were concerned about my desire to move to a more vibrant city, but I always refused. Maybe you could say I'm a traditionalist, but that's just how I am. My life took an unexpected turn that forced me to move to another city and start a new life in an unfamiliar city, and it all happened when I was around 30 years old. My plans don't include competing for the coveted primetime slots on the major channels, which are usually done by more experienced staff, but I would like to get at least a 15 to 30-minute show on a local channel. Additionally, I had the opportunity to work for a channel in a small town that adheres to the aforementioned political views, and while this position had its limitations, it gave me a comprehensive view of what was going on at the New York Times. At my last company, I was ready to be promoted to primetime host due to the stability of the job, but an unpleasant incident due to Dave's exposure prevented me from being promoted. I recently celebrated my 40th birthday, my first holiday since my divorce, and decided to go on a solo holiday to Florida, which, as much as I wanted to enjoy it, I found myself not being able to fully enjoy it. Sure, some single women seem to enjoy their independence, but they chose to be single themselves, and that wasn't my choice. Ever since I reached an age where I could date, 15 years for me, I've never wanted to be alone again. Of course, the problem comes when I try to form new friendships or meet new people. People ask about my past all the time, and I still feel so ashamed to tell them that I cheated on my husband and caused him irreparable harm at the time. I've told a few female friends I've made at the library about it, but their harsh condemnation only adds to my embarrassment because everyone reacts differently. My mother recently told me about an incident that has completely changed my mental state, and in a recent phone conversation with her, she once again urged me to reconsider my dating and marriage prospects. Over the years, unfortunately, my father, believing that I have disgraced his family, has practically disowned me, and as a result, I have not returned to the house since the moment I left it, and if my mother comes to see me every 2 years, my brother has not been a part of our lives since moving to California, as he is a busy banker and has very little time to visit us. In our conversation last week, she started talking about marriage again, encouraging me to make new friends and date, but I adamantly refused to do so, and in a fit of anger, she turned to conflict, urging me to move on with my life as Dave has done, and he now has a great family life. Just a few weeks ago, the children had just celebrated their first birthdays and Dave had taken it upon himself to organize a huge birthday celebration for them at the local community hall. When I found out about this, tears came to my eyes. Mom noticed my frustration and advised me to forget the past. When I learned that Dave was happily married and the father of 2 children, I felt my heart ache like a knife. He had completely ruined me and taken everything from me, and although it was my own fault, I didn't realize that he would give me such terrible revenge. I had suffered a mini stroke, the consequences of which had left my left hand completely anemic, which made my life even more complicated. As I sat in my SUV parked outside the cafe, using the free internet service, I felt I had to write about it. I've replayed the scene in my head countless times and now I really want to write about it. My wife is a 36-year-old woman, our daughter is a 13-year-old girl, and I am a 37-year-old man. But everything changed when I accidentally found out that my wife was cheating on me. I was totally confused by the shock because I believed that our marriage was built on a solid foundation, that there used to be a lot of intimate gestures between us, that we spent a lot of time having honest conversations, that we regularly scheduled date nights and even shared our hobbies. But when I found out that my wife was cheating on me, it turned out that it wasn't me she was attracted to, but another person. It was hard to imagine that the person I thought was closest to me would betray me in this way. It seems I was wrong. After attending a company safety seminar, I came home late and saw my spouse asleep on the couch. Suddenly, I received a message on my mobile phone with an emoticon similar to the ones I usually use in my messages. Alex is married with 3 children, the youngest being only 2 years old. As I read the message, something inside of me snapped. My feelings for Eva, whom I loved more than anything else in the world, I began to become resentful eventually. I felt emotionally cut off from everything, not just Eva, who complained of a sore neck because she'd slept on the sofa all night, but I didn't get up in response to her complaints. On the contrary, the whole world felt muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume strangely. I didn't care at all. I felt a sense of absolute indifference. Considering all this, I was silent at breakfast. While my wife and daughter talked enthusiastically, they didn't seem to notice any change in me, as if I didn't exist, and I couldn't shake off this feeling of being a stranger in a strange land. My voice seemed to disappear into the silence, and frustratingly, no one even noticed my absence. I was painfully aware that although my daughters and I were both at home, neither of them had any genuine feelings for me. I experienced waves of discomfort that came and went, sometimes swallowing me whole. I lingered in this state for 5 days until finally Eva asked me at dinner if anything had happened in that time, and I hadn't said 3 words to her or our daughter. I didn't even answer her question. I just made a face that indicated I was fine, I don't know, and went back to eating. The next day, I decided not to go to work, and as an employee of a local energy company, I worked on electrical wiring repairs and other similar tasks. As a result, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table anticipating my wife's return, and when she came home with a couple of bags of groceries and unpacked them, she immediately started talking about how her day had gone. I paid no attention to her, and shortly thereafter, our daughters appeared, also paying no attention to me, and with their backs to me, they began to talk about the little things they were selling. Reflecting on our shared past, I realized that I was never really family to them. I was just an appendage, an insignificant person in their lives. I felt a wave of pain come over me and tears streamed down my face, but they didn't notice my pain, which made me very angry because I had a glass of water in front of me. The glass shattered into many pieces and everything around me was sprinkled with shards of glass. They all turned around suddenly, and when they saw my twisted, tear-stained face, it was filled with anger, confusion, and uncertainty. Eva tried to justify her behavior and began to explain. I got a brief apologetic look from her and then said I was sorry and I could explain. I stood in the car park for a few more minutes before giving up and leaving, about 15 minutes after Eva had repeatedly tried to contact me and bombarded me with phone calls. The next day I withdrew half of our entire funds and phoned my boss to say I couldn't be sure of my return. In response, he threatened to sack me if I didn't turn up for work. She sobbed uncontrollably in the hallway as I recounted to her the insidious behavior of Alex and his wife. I spent the next few days trying to keep my emotions in check, and despite all my efforts, I was unable to make any substantial progress, and I spent most of my time looking for a reason to keep living. It was during these tumultuous days that I learned that Eva's brother, a police officer named Bob, had somehow found me. Bob forcibly dragged me into the living room, where his wife and daughter nonchalantly and relentlessly criticized me, and despite their foul mouths, I chose to remain silent and simply suffered in silence their surprise when they showed annoyance at me. Eventually, Eva's frustration peaked and she demanded that I speak up. I stared at her closely and calmly said that I had nothing to say to her. Bob's wife left him 4 months ago, and even though I felt bad for Bob, I couldn't help but laugh because he was so pathetic. "Did you hurt your wife?" I continued to laugh, maybe because I had blood in my mouth and the situation was so ridiculous that I defiantly spat the blood in Bob's face and said, "Go to hell, Bob." The blow was strong enough to knock me out, and when I came to my senses I realized that I was in the hospital, and as soon as I opened my eyes I couldn't control myself and threw up on the floor, which indicated that I had suffered a concussion. She gave me a vomit container, took my pulse and called for cleanup. I confessed to her that my trouble was caused by my own family and asked them to leave me alone. Fortunately, I didn't run into them again during my hospital stay, which was a huge relief. But I quickly dismissed the idea, as I realized that in such a small town, colleagues would probably defend him, and it seemed useless and illogical to oppose his wife. In a conversation with my daughter, I expressed my disappointment at Eva's betrayal and told her that I would no longer play a fatherly role in her life, and in a letter to Eva I tried to give practical advice. I made it clear that if she wanted a divorce, I would no longer provide her with any help or support and that she would have to solve all her problems herself. At the end of our conversation I said that she had caused me a lot of pain and that I was sorry that I had said those things because in my opinion I had allowed her to take away a part of me and cause me more pain. Luckily, I escaped without help, and when I got back to the hotel I quickly retrieved my car and made a snap decision to replace it with a compact van. Whilst I allowed him to contact me when necessary, especially when signing important documents, I sincerely hoped that I would not be disturbed in the first few months. I have a loving wife, a caring daughter, a supportive family and friends, but it's just an illusion that these people never really cared about me. I don't participate in taxes and I don't have a bank account. If someone asked me who I was, I would answer under the pseudonym Fred, even though it's not my real name. But now that anonymity extends to strangers, and not just those who confide in me. Honestly, I came to appreciate this new anonymity. I make my own beer, walk around a lot, and am not burdened with any obligations. Additionally, I can proudly say that I am currently in the best physical condition of my life. Overall, my life is getting better as I have moved away from people who just want to exploit me and pretend to care about me. As for my wife, daughters, old friends and distant relatives, I don't know their whereabouts, my marital status and possible alimony obligations remain uncertain, and the fate of my former home remains a mystery, but it has no significance in my life because I've taken a break from these worries. At this stage of my life I feel liberated, peaceful and contented. Perhaps even close to unhappy. Material wealth is not important to me because I realize that I need very little. When I come to the end of my journey I intend to liquidate all my possessions and destroy any remaining wealth. I intend to leave no valuables behind so that there will be nothing left to remind anyone of my existence. Sometimes I come to shopping centers, railway stations and bus stops just to observe people. In these moments, I notice that some people resemble those I used to be. They are burdened with guilt, under constant pressure, forced to make great sacrifices, in an endless pursuit of material gain, designer clothes, big houses and other little things, and not even a simple gesture of gratitude. In many cases, there is a distinct lack of gratitude or appreciation, often not even a simple smile. But I saw it in them as I had once seen it in myself. Deep down they understood everything, and I could recognize the look of empty attachment because I had once had the same look. I contacted a friend who enjoys hunting and asked him if it would be possible to visit him before he arrived. We spoke on the phone, and one of the first actions he took was to properly secure all of my hunting supplies. My father arrived and took me to a doctor's appointment, after which I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where the doctor suspected emotional and psychological trauma, possibly accompanied by depression. Although I am not sure of the exact diagnosis, I must wait for further tests. I do not know what action will be taken by the medical staff or whether they will be able to offer any help if the counselors agree, and I hope I will be able to talk to my daughter GRE in the near future if she agrees. My father has already discussed the situation with her to some extent, and he has told me that she has feelings for me and wants me to be there for her. My father is currently with me, and I will remain in custody for the next few days. Surprisingly, Bob Conrad privately apologized to me that Eva had overlooked the real reason I had left the hotel, mentioning only the glass in the wall. Bob said that after learning the truth, he informed his supervisor of his behavior. He prepared a detailed written confession and all the necessary paperwork for me to read and sign if I wanted to sell it. Otherwise, if I decided not to go down that road, he would be allowed to continue working but with a reduced salary and mood. Over the past week I have felt overwhelmed and disorientated. Initially, my access to the internet was restricted due to the hospital's decision to remove it, and I was very unsettled, but I am happy to report that I was discharged from the hospital on Friday morning. During my mystery days at the clinic I received extensive treatment which has greatly improved my overall health, and although I still require daily treatment I no longer need to remain in hospital. In this regard, my behavior has deteriorated somewhat, but I am actively undergoing intensive therapy and have been prescribed medication to promote recovery. Currently, I only occasionally take medication when I feel depressed, and although I still get bouts of sharp pain from time to time that leave me numb, this is less common now. At first, I had a hard time believing her, but with time and insight, I realized that my misgivings were coming entirely from within. I have apologized countless times and admitted my mistakes instead of continuing to apologize. After my wife, Ava, left our house to move in with her parents, I found out that my father was secretly paying off the mortgage to keep the house from being sold. As a result, I decided to sell the house, move into a tiny house, and start living a simpler life that would bring me closer to nature and reduce stress. Currently, I am exploring the option of renting or buying a piece of land in order to live a more simple life, at least for a while. Interestingly, my daughter is very supportive of this plan and is keen to explore tiny houses like a seasoned professional. Alex is currently trying to repair his relationship with his wife and has completely cut ties with Eva. According to Eva's mother, she has recently lost her job, is very depressed and is virtually housebound at her parents' house, where, according to her mother, almost everyone rejects her. He was a very loyal friend and probably saved my life. The devastating consequences of my wife's infidelity not only destroyed me, but my family as well. I reached out to Bob's employer to defend his future police work, and Bob paid me a personal visit on Thursday and meticulously prepared all the paperwork needed to file a complaint against him. He took full responsibility for his actions, admitting that it was entirely his fault, and he even urged me to continue to file a complaint against him. I knew many of his colleagues and they often mention his helpful qualities. I also learned about the reasons for his divorce from his wife, and that despite his modest income, Bob generously donated 10% of his salary to volunteer for the homeless 3 days a week. But I firmly believe that Bob is a genuinely kind person. I was willing to endure any hardship so that people like Bob could continue to do good. At my insistence, he took me to meet the homeless man he was helping today, which reaffirmed the importance of his actions. Fortunately, things are going well for my daughter as well, but this path has turned me into someone who has a hard time trusting anyone but my daughter. The old house was sold and replaced by a rather modest house where my daughter and I now live. The tranquility of this place brings me great joy as I deeply appreciate the peace of my new home, and luckily we are surrounded by beautiful nature. My ex-wife repented almost every day for what she had done, and she pleaded with me to give her another chance. She made no demands and took full responsibility for her betrayal and made no attempt to justify herself. I hesitate to accept her help because I don't want to feel indebted to her. On the contrary, I intend to do my own chores because the flat is still very small and because I think it is important for my daughter to take responsibility and not to be spoilt. I assure you that she has told you her intentions openly and honestly, that she has expressed her wish to be reconciled with me and that she is committed to endeavoring to achieve this. I am comforted by her commitment to honor the boundaries I have set, which gives me satisfaction. Now that I have regained my senses, I think it is extremely important for our daughter to maintain a relationship with her mother. As for property, I intend to give half to my ex-wife at the last minute or immediately after the divorce, as we have been accumulating these funds together for the duration of our marriage, so it would be fair if she gets an equal share. She is as active as we are in counseling, including family therapy, and I am fully prepared to right the wrongs and do everything possible to make amends, especially for the sake of our daughter. I am determined to set a positive example, so I will lead by example. Coping with the aftermath has been very difficult, but I am finally beginning to regain the stability that we will ultimately find solace in, even if it causes irreparable damage to our family and marriage. It had been 6 months since the divorce, and my daughter and I had only then recovered from the shock of my wife's behavior. As soon as my wife received half of all our savings, I became the sole custodian of our daughter.